Welcome to Entry Point Faith. Join us each week to discover fresh meaning in the world and find faith your way. Now, here is Pastor Nancy Lafferty.
When I was in the 10th grade, sitting in world history class, I discovered that I loved the study of religion. I have mentioned before that one of my favorite teachers for that class, Mrs. Kohler, was one of my favorite teachers because she taught with energy and passion. She made the content of the class, come on, boring world history, she made it something that I could relate to. We didn't study dates. We studied movements. We didn't focus on learning individual names of heroes. We learned about the people as a group. We learned about the cultures around the world, and that included, of course, the religions of the world. Now, after several weeks of delving into studying the world religions, I had an epiphany. Now, I thought we were studying the religions to find all of the differences between them. But suddenly, all I could see were the similarities between each religion. I also learned in that class that people fought sometimes over religion, and sometimes there were even religious wars. I couldn't believe that millions of Catholic and Protestant Christians would slaughter each other over such minor religious differences when it was clear that both sides ultimately believed in and worshiped the same God, a God whose primary commands were that of we should love one another and we should even love our enemy. The same could be said within the Muslim congregations. They share the same God, and yet they kill each other. That doesn't sound like anything relatable to our world today, does it? When I think of cultures of people and the clash that sometimes exists between them, I'm often reminded of a sentence that one of my professors at Ball State University used to say. Dr. Phyllis Gordon would often say, there are greater differences within cultures than between them. Now, when I first heard that phrase, I didn't really get it. But the more I heard about it and thought about it, the more I understood what she meant. Groups may appear to be different, but once you begin to study them, to observe them, to learn about them, we find a far greater number of similarities between them. The differences actually occur within the group of people that should be closer in attitudes, opinions, and beliefs. The same thing happens to us on the individual level, doesn't it? Even when someone appears to be dramatically opposite of who we are, we can find many things that we have in common if we're willing to take the time to get to know each other. Religion can be described in the following way. It's organized systems of beliefs. There are followers, ceremonies, practices, worship that are centered around one supreme God or deity. Religion can also be described as the way that humans attempt to gain the highest possible good for themselves by living their lives the best way that they can with some spiritual guidance. The religion that we choose to follow is very tied to our early upbringing, where we were born, what our family of origin believed, and what was the culture at the time. As I was growing up, you just walked to the closest church. That's the church you became connected to. If the Methodist church closed or you moved, then you ended up going to the Presbyterian church because you could walk down the street to it. As we move away, though, from our origin, our home of origin, and we grow older, we can change our religious identification, or we can choose to keep it just as it was in our childhood. Some people are part of a religious group, some people are not. But as we think about the 4,000 religions, faith communities, and denominations around the world, that's a lot, 4,000. We can certainly think of many things that are different about them. How they pray, who they pray to, the name of their spiritual deity, the building they worship in, the structure of their services, and the number of times a week that they actually meet, what they can eat, and of course, what they believe. Muslims pray to Allah 5 times a day. Christians pray to God when the pastor asks them to pray or whenever they want to pray to God. Those who follow Judaism often go to the synagogue to pray in the morning and in the afternoon. But there are a large number of elements that are consistent across all of the world religions. Here are some of the things that the religions have in common. First of all, a supreme being to worship, something we can't see, but we're asked to believe in. In every single religion, that supreme being, God, or whatever name someone has for that supreme deity, does not appear to the masses directly, but instead uses a person from among the people to instruct them to follow the deity. Every religion has prophets or messengers who have received words from the supreme being and tells the people what the supreme being has said. Sacred texts for instructions are part of every organized faith community. Christians have the Bible. Muslims read the Quran. Hindus read the Vedas. The Baha'i followers read the writings of Baha'u'llah. Each group has a sacred text to read and study. Each religion has sacred days, gathering places, and of course, rituals. Now, certainly those sacred days and gathering places and rituals might be different, but they all have them. And finally, all religions offer instructions on how we should act toward one another. All religious groups believe that they have some good advice to pass on to people who participate in their services. All of them have a desire to help people get along with each other and become the very best versions of themselves that they can be. Along with, of course, growing spiritually and becoming closer to their supreme deity. I will say as a side note that back in the day when people used to go to church all the time, children behaved better in school. Right, teachers? Sometimes you could say to your student who was misbehaving, "What would your pastor say if I described the way you behaved at school today?" Well, you're not allowed to say those things today. And a lot of kids don't go to church. So they don't have the basic moral compass, which is what every church, every religion tries to give, a sense of a moral compass. So here are some of the common instructions across all religions that are taught in some form. This is incredibly interesting. Feed the poor. You will reap what you sow. Don't judge. Honor your parents. Do no harm. Be slow to anger. Speak the truth. Love your neighbor. Forgive when possible. Follow the spirit of the scriptures, not the words. And finally, the cornerstone of all religious understanding, follow the golden rule. The golden rule in all religions encourages people to treat others as they would like to be treated. Treat others fairly and justly, just like we want. I find it interesting, but understandable that is part of every religious instruction, because that is counter to our nature. What do we want? What we want. What do we care about in other people? Not a lot. But we are instructed by all faith communities to treat them like we would like to be treated. Now, when we think about that rule, which we all heard about from the time we were young children, we are tempted to think that that rule is just for children. Once we become adults, we may feel like we no longer need to apply that rule during our business transactions or in our personal relationships. Many of our cultural norms go against the golden rule. They encourage us in our culture to take care of ourselves, take care of number one, no matter what. So that might mean that we use other people, not caring about their needs or their work or their feelings. Our culture often inspires us to do whatever it takes to get ahead. And if we are honest, we know that that doesn't involve sometimes applying the golden rule. If we were all to follow the golden rule, this world would be so much better. Peace would cover the globe. All people would come so much closer to having what they need. Abuse would disappear. Food would be more plentiful. And wars would end. A long time ago in China, a young woman named Lily got married, and she went to live with her husband and her mother-in-law. And in a very short time, Lily and her mother-in-law were not getting along very well. The mother-in-law criticized Lily all the time. Their personalities clashed, and everybody was angry and unhappy, so everybody in the house was in a bad mood all the time. So Lily decided she had the solution. She would go to one of her father's friends who sold herbs and see if he would give her some poison so that she could take care of the problem. The herb guy said he would help her solve the problem, but Lily needed to understand there were some concrete instructions that she would need to follow. She agreed, and so he went to the back room and he returned with a package of herbs. He said to her, "Now you can't use a quick-acting poison to get rid of your mother-in-law because people would then get suspicious. Therefore, I've given you a number of herbs that will slowly build up in her body. Here's what you need to do. Every other day, prepare some pork or some chicken, put a little of the herbs in her serving. And now, in order to make sure nobody suspects you when she dies, you must be very careful to act friendly toward her. Don't argue with her. Just do what she wants. Treat her like a queen." Lily was thrilled to have a solution to the problem. Weeks went by and she did exactly what she was instructed to do. After 6 months, the whole household had changed. The two women were getting along. And in fact, they treated each other like mother and daughter. And her husband was so pleased that everybody was getting along. The whole mood in the house had shifted. So Lily went back to the herb guy, and she goes, "Look, can you please help me keep the poison from killing my mother-in-law? I love her now. I love her like my mother. I don't want her to die." And the man smiled and said, "Oh, don't have to worry about it. I didn't give you any poison. The herbs I gave you were vitamins to improve her health. But your attitude has changed. Your treatment of her has changed. The love that you have given to her has changed your whole household." The moral of this story is, of course, how we treat others is exactly how they will treat us. In China, it is said, "The person who loves others will also be loved."
Thanks for listening in on this week's discussion on Entry Point Faith. You can join the Entry Point Faith community in person every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at Conner Prairie in Fishers, Indiana. For more information and a transcript of Nancy's messages, visit entrypointonline.org. Entry Point Faith is brought to you in partnership with mypodcast.media.